I'll see you guys in the dark.
This happened last Friday night, and I'm still stumped. For reference, I'm a male in my late 20s and live with my girlfriend who is currently away on business. I work for a large financial institute in the UK and often work very late, as I hate bringing home work. For some background information, we bought our current house a few weeks ago, and during the move-in process I was away with work. Leaving it down to my partner and a few friends, my car has also recently had a complete electronics failure, so we were down to using just her car. The house itself is located at a small gated community off of a country road on the outskirts of an upmarket town in the UK. It's surrounded by woodlands, and if you didn't live there or know anybody who does, chances are you wouldn't have heard of it or even knew it even existed. In total, there are 8 houses in the community, and the main gates give access to the first 6, where my house is located, and then there's a further 2 gates at the top of the road, which lead to the very large mansion-style houses. The houses which haven't got individual gates are all about 100 feet away from each other and have enclosed rear gardens, and the neighbors are all business types, who are very often in work and keep themselves to themselves. Anyway, about 2 days after leaving for my business trip, I got a call from my girlfriend, who seems shaken and tells me that there's a man standing in the garden, and that she can't see his face, but he's walking around and crouching in the tree line. So, concerned, but not 100% convinced as she does have a vivid imagination, and it's the first time she's been home alone in our new house, I tell her to lock the doors, go to bed, and call the police if she sees him again. I return to our city's train station on Tuesday and agree with my girlfriend that she'll pick me up in her car, and then I'll take it home, and she's scheduled to go to Manchester for a conference. I met up with her, grabbed a coffee, and see her off to her train, then drive her car back to the house. The time is roughly around 9 p.m. I park the car in the driveway, head inside, shower, watch some reruns of King of the Hill, and then head to bed. Then I get woken up by a light being shown into the bedroom window from downstairs. I get up to investigate, crouching to avoid being seen, and head into the study next to our bedroom and open the curtains that come from some French doors that lead to a small balcony. My heart drops when I see a man that has now moved towards the back door and is trying the handle. He stops for a while, begins flashing the light on and off back into the woods, before walking calmly back into them. I call the police and make a report. Nothing happens on Wednesday, but on Thursday, when I'm giving our cat a bath, I hear the garage door being messed with. I'm in the bedroom directly behind the garage, so I move into the kitchen to get a knife before heading into the garage to check what's going on. When the noises stop and I hear running down the driveway and away from the house, I call the police and they send an officer around to check the property. All they find is some knife marks and scuffs on the bottom of the garage. On Friday, I get my car delivered from the dealership and decide to work from home. I also park my car in the garage, leaving my girlfriend's on the driveway. At around 11 p.m., I'm in the upstairs study, listening to music and working, when I find myself freezing. I thought I was going to stop breathing as I felt someone watching me, and turning to face the French doors, I see a man, nondescriptive looking, around 35, wearing a coat and gloves, carrying what looks like a torch, standing on my balcony. Our eyes met. Now filled with rage, I go for one of my golf clubs from the golf bag and charge towards the door. He climbs down off the balcony and runs off into the woods. I've never seen this man in my life before, but I am sure it's a man that's been causing problems recently. It's also dawned on me that he wouldn't have seen my girlfriend before, and only seen her car. Maybe he thought she lived alone. I've notified the police and have bought some more security devices to install on the property, as well as parked my car on the driveway with hers. We don't know who he is or why he's doing this, but we're hoping it won't happen again. Back in 1998, or 99, I was around 5 or 6 years old and living in a crime and drug-ridden part of the downtown area. Our house had a giant backyard that was full of thick jungle-like trees and bushes that had been taken over by the earth and also random passerbys. We knew this due to the heroin needles that were around and half of the mattress that had once been on the forest floor that had since grown 15 feet into the air with the trees. There was also a path that people could use as a shortcut to the main road, so there was a lot of traffic with shady people passing through. When you're a kid, this is a nightmare of a backyard, so I was spooked since the time we moved in. I would complain constantly to my mom about someone watching me from outside my window when I would try to sleep. Once or twice, there had been times of him watching me, and he had shined a flashlight in my room, and I saw a flash of his face, which I can still picture. His dark eyes burned through me, and for a while I never said anything, but eventually I told someone. My mom always said it was just a nightmare, and brushed it off for a week or two while ignoring my relentless complaints. Eventually, after having to fight with me to go to sleep one night, my mom had dragged me outside the next morning to prove me wrong. We went outside to my window, and to her surprise, the grass had been stomped on only outside of my window to the point that the grass was almost dead and mud remained. There was also tons of scratch marks from a tool of some kind outside the window as if someone was trying to break in. I was in a basement with one of those small windows that don't open, so breaking it through there is super unlikely, but it still shook my family. My mom was horrified and had started making plans to move, but we were so broke growing up that leaving right away was not an option. Around that same time, me and my best friend, who was also my next-door neighbor, had become inseparable. We hung out almost constantly and had no sense of danger and would do dumb stuff like go to the other neighbors' houses and ask for candy. Our favorite was this elderly lady who always had hostess cakes for us, and we would eventually go inside her house to hang out there. She was unbelievably nice and took care of us in a way. Our parents had no idea we did this, but it was our little secret. One day, we were playing around the neighborhood, and my mom yelled for me to come home, so we would pick up dinner just around the corner. We were only gone for 15 minutes at most, and when we came back to the house, we were in complete shock. The street was closed off with crime scene tape. There was 2 or 3 news station vans, a dozen police cars, and either a life flight helicopter getting ready to touch down, or a news helicopter. While we were gone getting food, a man who was not from the neighborhood, had been staying with his mom for the last few weeks, had walked past my best friend's yard and saw her on the phone. She was talking to a friend, and someone making fun of him that he walked back to his mom's house and came back with a butcher knife and was planning on killing the girl for mistreating him. Because of where she was sitting on the porch, she could see him coming back with a knife, and ran inside the home and locked herself in the bedroom and called the police with the phone that she luckily already had in her hand. Unfortunately, my friend's mom was in the kitchen and was not as lucky. The man took his anger out on her mother and stabbed her so many times that I can't even remember the number, but I think it was in the 20s. Somehow, after the amount of time her mother was stabbed, she survived and made a full recovery after many surgeries. After his arrest, the story was all over the news, and I remember watching it with my mom pretty religiously to make sure my friend's mom was all right. They posted his mugshot, and I remember the most intense amount of fear flowing through me. The man who stabbed this woman was also the man who would watch me outside my window. I later found out that we had met this man weeks earlier at the elderly lady's house we frequently asked for candy. It was her son, and he had initially met us at her house and had been keeping an eye on us ever since. He had only gotten out of prison a month or so earlier and was staying with her since his release. I never took note of him when we first met, but maybe if I did, I would have known right away who my night stalker was, and who could have prevented all that happened afterwards. We never did end up moving. My mom figured the danger was gone, so we stayed another year. To this day, I never sleep with the blinds open. To the creep who watched me in my sleep and tried to kill my friend and her mother, I hope we never meet, and you're rotting in jail somewhere. It was 2002, so I was still using AIM as my main way to chat with people. They said my AIM username wasn't published anywhere, tied to my actual name. Now in college, we get a lookbook with pics and short summaries of everyone in our year. I'll show proposed major,
hometown, and dorm extension phone number. It does not give your aim or anywhere you live. Well, so I'm a lesbian freshman from Texas at a small liberal arts Ivy school. So I'm far from home, but nestled in a pretty tight-knit, supportive community. Boy, did that come out to bite me in the ass quickly. So before college, I came out on a show, and anyways, I was getting recognized. So one day on AIM, I get a chat request from a user I don't know. That wasn't odd because it just happens sometimes, and it could have been a new friend or something. But no one at my college had my AIM. I just had started and was always kind of a loner. This person claimed to be a friend of a friend of a friend from home, and a fan of the show, and I thought it was weird she found my AIM but didn't look into it. She basically started out friendly and even seemingly into me. I wasn't into her. I didn't know this random person, and I had a girlfriend. I tried to let her down gently, but every time I did, she would go off on religious rants about how she isn't gay and I'm going to hell for being gay and she wants to save me. She would go off on these crazy rants, delete her SN and come back with a new one, try to be sweet, and the psycho would start all over. This happened a few times. I thought she was sad, bored, closeted troll. So at this point, I'm basically ignoring her random users and incoming messages that are sometimes several a day. She was cycling on her own, being sweet with kissy faces, angered at no reply, ranting about me burning in hell, then suddenly a new screen name. I just ignored them. They popped up. She finally got sick of being ignored, and one day she tells me, I know XYZ, what I wore that day, the way I walk, all these obsessive little details about myself, where I eat, my routine, the classes I'm taking. She then drops the bombshell that she is actually a student at my school, on my campus. My year had the same admission counselor, same advisor. She told me the name, and I ran to look at the book to see who this psycho was. I was terrified when I saw her photo. Not to judge a book by its cover, but she looked like the lady that killed Selena. Suddenly, I couldn't just block or ignore her. Not fully. She was literally in my circle, but no choice of my own. After she revealed who she truly was, her rants got a little less crazy. Way less burning in hell talk, thankfully. But now, I'd met people, and they'd go, Oh, Selena Killer was talking about you. Man, she's a great person. You guys are close. I'm so glad. Always them saying how amazing she was and how lucky I am to have found such a cool friend. Always. I didn't know how to react. I wanted people to like me and go around screaming week 3 of college that Selena Killer is crazy and she's stalking me. It just makes me sound crazy, especially since there's this weird false comfort of being in a predetermined or pre-selected group. It's this idea that people have been vetted, or something, I don't know. It's hard to explain. Suffice to say, me calling her out about this to our peers wouldn't have exactly paged me as someone who fostered a sense of community. I asked her how she got my username, why she was watching me. She told me she got it from the flip book, and that she wasn't watching. It's just a small school, and that I was sure highly of myself. So now I'm thinking maybe I'm just being arrogant and paranoid. I don't know. One day at 2 a.m., my phone rings. It doesn't stop. I finally answer, annoyed, and it's the girl. I'm freaking out, and she so casually says, Hey, I'm on my way. What? Archibald 420, right? That's your dorm room, right? I flipped. I yell, Do not come here. I hang up on the phone. It continues to ring, and I freak out so much I unplug it from the wall. I think she got my dorm from stalking me. But how she got my AIM, I still don't know. No one had it on campus, and at that point, I searched everywhere for my connections, of my name to my username, and found nothing. And I don't know when she saw me and put me together with the show, and exactly when or how her obsession started. She continued to be a psycho for a while. I mean, maybe I overreacted, but I was far from home, and only in my first couple of weeks at school. First time adulthood, all that. And suddenly, I was always looking over my shoulder. She did eventually come out her sophomore year. She then dated my very best friend, and she called me up one day, saying they both wanted to take a little road trip to my hometown in Texas while I was visiting my family. I got so creeped out because the creepy little fuck just wants to get off on seeing my family and where I live and stuff. I strongly suggest to my best friend that I'm not comfortable with it. She assured me that it's totally fine and that this girl isn't a creep. I tried to cancel several different ways, but it wasn't happening. At one point, they said if they couldn't crash at my family's house, or if I wasn't there, they were just going to make the 11-hour trip each way. You know, do a road trip and see the town I grew up in. My hometown. A little shithole, mind you. Well, the creepy fucker stayed at my house. My dad barbecued for them. She had such a fucking smug look of satisfaction on her face. I then realized she stopped being obsessed with me long ago, and now just enjoyed making me uneasy and rubbing our connections in my face. They eventually broke up. She isn't a best friend anymore, and I genuinely hope to never see that creepy little woman ever again. And if people could stop saying how awesome she is, and that she'd be nice too. In the summer of 2015, I worked at a university in a small southern town. I lived a few miles away from campus in a 2-bedroom house with a roommate, and my schedule was pretty rigid. Same routine every day. I went to class in the morning, work in the afternoon, and got home around 9 p.m. One Thursday night, I arrived at home at the usual time and noticed that there was an old pickup truck idling at the yield sign across the street from my house. I didn't know the make or model, but it was beat up, peeling paint, rust, dents. It looked really out of place in our neighborhood. Most people there drove nice modern cars, so this thing stood out like a sore thumb. The streets were deserted. It clearly wasn't waiting for other cars to pass. I thought maybe the driver was just texting or something, but since my roommate wasn't home yet, I didn't want to leave the safety of my own vehicle. I'm a petite woman who doesn't carry pepper spray anymore, so I try to be aware of my surroundings. I pull into my driveway and just sat there, staring at the truck and waiting for it to leave. Eventually it did. It pulled away slowly and made its way out of the neighborhood towards the main road. When it was out of sight, I went inside, locked the doors behind me, and made myself some dinner. By 11 p.m., my roommate still hadn't come home, and I was folding laundry and listening to podcasts in my bedroom. I'd forgotten all about the truck. Suddenly, the lights went out. That spooked me, because normally our power didn't shut off unless there was bad weather. That night was clear as a bell, so I immediately called my roommate and asked where she was. He told me he was already on his way home and would be there in about 5 minutes. Relieved, I just told him to step on it and hung up. No reason to freak out about a power outage, right? He'd be there soon enough, and then we could figure out together. I walked into the living room to wait for him. Our front door had a little diamond-shaped window in it. I stood on my tiptoes and looked out to see if our neighbor's power was out as well. I was surprised to see that it wasn't. Even the street light near our front yard was still on. Weird. Had I somehow blown a fuse? Just as I considered making a trip to the basement to reset the breakers, I received a text message from my mom. I don't remember what it was about, but it only took me a few seconds to answer it. After I did, I looked out the window again. To my utter shock and surprise, there was a man standing under the street light. He hadn't been there before, and I instantly got a bad feeling. He was middle-aged, about 6 feet tall, with a pot belly and little round glasses. Unkempt hair, old sneakers. His white t-shirt and blue jeans were filthy. He looked like he had been working on a car or something. He was a mechanic, dirty, you know, and he had his awful, smug expression on his face. I had never seen him before. Still in shock at actually seeing someone out there, I didn't move. Luckily, he couldn't see me because the inside of my house was pitch dark. But to my absolute horror, he was headed straight for me, not walking quickly or with a purpose, just kind of casually shuffling towards the house. If someone else were to pass by, they probably wouldn't realize what he was up to. He even glanced around a few times, as if making sure nobody else was watching. Inch by inch, he made his way into the yard. This guy was coming to get me. I was sure of it. I started to shake. I think it's worth mentioning that my dog is very people-oriented and usually goes bananas when he hears someone outside. This time, he was silent. He had no idea there was a man approaching, even though I was staring at him through the window. When the man was about halfway to the porch, my roommate's car finally rounded the bend and turned into our street. As soon as those headlights lit him up, the man turned to look and recognized the approaching vehicle. My roommate and I both saw his face. He recognized that car. In his haste to get away, he nearly stepped in front of it and got out and ran over. My roommate swerved into the driveway, scrambled out, and charged into the house. He didn't even speak to me. He just grabbed the axe out of our utility closet and went back outside to confront the man. But the man was gone. We called the police and the power company, and they both sent someone to check things out. The police didn't find anything. The repairman set the box on the pole near our house. I asked the repairman if there was any way that a person could have been responsible for that, but he didn't give me a straight answer. The following day, we went to a camping trip that lasted all weekend. If the man came back, we never knew. And after that, I refused to be home alone. If my roommate wasn't around when I got off work, I killed time at a local bar until he got back. We both moved away a year later. I never saw the man or the truck again, but sometimes I wonder how long he had been watching our house, and what might have happened if my roommate hadn't been on his way home that night.
When I was in high school, my freshman year, I had a small group of friends. We all ran cross country together and got pretty close. We would hang out together after school as well. Things started to unravel when one of the guys in the group started asking me out all the time. I had no feelings for him and was constantly turning him down. Then, he started to get really weird. He would write me letters that were basically his fantasies about me, and then the letters I would reciprocate. One time, when the group was all at his house, he told me he wanted to show me something in his room, and me, being a bit naive, went with him. Only when we got in his room did I realize I was alone with him, and that he had shut the door behind us. Nothing happened, but I got a weird feeling and ran out of the room as quickly as I could. Our friendship really deteriorated after that. He would call me, text me, message me constantly, and even show up at my parents' house unannounced. I did my best to cut him out of my life. After he graduated high school, I had blocked him on everything, so communication finally ended. Fast forward about 8 years. On my birthday, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer, but they left me a voicemail. It was him. He said he got me a present that he wanted to give me. I just needed to call him back. My heart dropped. I don't know how he got my number, because it was different from the one I had in high school. I decided to ignore him and not call him back. He kept calling and leaving me messages for a few weeks. Finally, he left me a voicemail that said, "I'm going to make this really short. If you don't meet up with me, I'm going to end myself." I called the police and reported it so he could be checked up on. The problem was, I had no info on him. I only knew his name and phone number. I didn't know where he lived now or anything else. They said they would look into it. I didn't get any more calls from him. 2 months later, my little sister called me in a panic during broad daylight. My stalker had gone to my parents' house, let himself inside, and gone down to the basement where my room was. She had opened the door to her room and found him standing there. She confronted him, and he quickly left the house, but stayed in the driveway by his car. She woke up my mom, who had recognized him. She confronted him outside while my sister called the police. He told her they told him he could come over and see me. He left before the police got there. They wrote a report, and that was all that happened. The police told us that they couldn't find him, and we really couldn't press charges because the door had been unlocked, and there were no trespassing signs in our yard. I was on edge, and my sister was on edge for months. Finally, the police let us know they found him. Someone else had called the police on him for a different reason, and when the police tried to apprehend him, he stabbed one of the cops with a pick. He's in jail now for less than a year for both charges. We have a restraining order against him as well. I just hope this is the end of it all. I'm terrified if he found out my new number. He can find my new address as well. I would have never expected violence from him, but now I know he is capable of it. Stalker, let's not meet again.
So these incidents started about 6 years ago and went on for a couple of years. I used to be really into the music scene, going to shows and festivals every chance I got. This often meant meeting random people whose names I could forget 5 seconds later. As a result of being out in Atlanta nightlife so often, I got frequent friend requests on Facebook, and naive younger me blindly accepted them, assuming they were just people I had met at shows that was too drunk or distracted to remember. One day, I got a message for somebody named Eddie. His Facebook profile picture was of somebody at least a decade older than me, with long, scraggly hair. He looked harmless enough, just another show-going hippie, I assumed. His message simply asked if I was the girl that danced a half circle around him at the local show last night, and then twirled dreamily away or something along those lines. I responded that I had no recollection of that, and upon further investigation, saw that he lived in an entirely different state, so it couldn't have been me. He said that I must have had a doppelganger out there somewhere, and I left the conversation at that. Over the next few months, I'd get random notifications that he had messaged me, asking me if I'd be at various shows across the southeast. I mostly ignored the messages, but would very occasionally respond, shortly expressing interest in a band he had mentioned. The messages became more and more frequent, so I just started to leave them. Why I didn't block him is beyond me. I guess I thought he was just harmless and lonely. Fast forward about a year. It's summer of 2013, and 2 of my best friends and I are caravanning to Wakarusa, a music festival that took place in Ozark, Arkansas. It was about a 13-hour drive from Atlanta, but totally worth it. We went every year. An important note here is that this wasn't some small, intimate festival. It hosted upwards of 40,000 people, and it was often hard to keep track of my friends, let alone find people I knew who came separately. So my friends and I are on our blanket in the middle of a huge crowd, watching widespread panic. It's nighttime, so the only lights are coming from the stage, and random LED toys or glow sticks or whatever. Out of nowhere, someone beelines for our blanket, makes himself at home next to me without permission, and strikes up a conversation. My groups of friends is generally warm and accepting, and it wasn't unusual to make random friends at a big hippie fest like this. So we thought nothing of it at first. Probably just someone high on ecstasy and looking for company. It wasn't until he started referencing me in my Facebook personally that the alarm bells started going off. This was Eddie. I had honestly completely forgotten about him and his persistent messages, and in the darkness there was no way I could have recognized him. He was talking like I was an old friend and tried to follow us around all night. Once I separately alerted the others about who he was, we made every excuse in the book to try to leave, go back to our campsite, call it a night. He was painfully insistent on following us back there and continuing to hang out. Obviously, I didn't want him to know where I slept, so I tried to appease him by saying I was exhausted, but that we would try to meet up tomorrow. He finally left us alone and walked a long roundabout to our campus just in case he had watched to try to follow at a distance. The next day I made an avid point to avoid the area where we ran into Eddie. The festival venue was huge, so I figured there was no way he'd find me again. I was beside a small stage in the back corner of the venue, hooping in the woods with my friends, when I noticed him out of the corner of my eye. He was standing beside a tree alone, watching me with a weird smile. It reminded me of a proud dad watching his young daughter play, but with way creepier and more sinister overtones. Still, he hadn't done or said anything explicitly creepy or threatening, but his presence was so unsettling that I grabbed my friends and we pretended that we had forgotten about a seat that was starting to... So we ran out of the woods. I remember hoping he didn't notice I had seen him. The festival ended the next day, and I was relieved not to see him again. Fast forward about another year. At this point, I barely used Facebook and had all but forgotten about Eddie. My friend that I went to the festival with was visiting from out of town that night, and we were going to get some drinks. He got to my house, and we were catching up, and the subject of the festival came up. We started talking about Eddie and how weird the whole situation was, but at this point, it was less creepy and more of just a strange memory. I told him Eddie used to message me all the time, but that I had stopped opening them years ago. Naturally, my friend wanted to look through the messages, so I obliged. He began to scroll through the messages, and I realized just how dire of a mistake it had been not to block him. He had started asking me by what shows I was going to go to, what part of Atlanta I lived in, not taking the hint that I clearly had no interest in responding at that point. Then as the months went by, he was sending me links to tickets he had bought for me to shows in Atlanta, and then links to tickets he had bought for us to go together. There was one message asking where he could pick me up for a show that was 2 hours away in Athens, and that he couldn't wait to see me again. The messages continued to go on, but at this point I was so creeped out, I immediately blocked him and closed the computer wide-eyed. What the actual hell? He sounded like he was carrying on an entire relationship with me without my consent. He never acknowledged the fact that I literally hadn't responded to or even seen a message from him in over a year. Shaken up, we decided to just go get a drink and stop thinking about this weirdo. We get to Edgewood and walk to our favorite small bar to get a drink. As soon as we walk into the bar, my heart sinks to the pit of my stomach. To this day, this was the creepiest, most coincidental moment that I had ever happened. I see Eddie sitting at the far end of the bar. His face lights up as soon as I walk in, and he motions me over. He says something along the lines of, "I can't believe it's you," starts firing off questions about me, my life, what I've been up to, etc. At this point, my darkest feelings wash over me. I just feel unsafe and exposed. Why is he here? He doesn't even fucking live in Georgia. I quickly tell him I have to use the restroom, but then I'll be back to the bar for a drink. I grab my friend, equally in shock, and we speed past around the corner to the bathrooms and then past them. I will forever be grateful that the door to the patio area was just past the bathrooms, so we got a head start. We went outside, hopped the fence, and started running to my car. I glanced behind us, and Eddie somehow figured out in those 15 seconds that we left and is walking rapidly across the crosswalk in our direction, eyes on me. Fucking booked to my car and got the hell out of Edgewood as quickly as we can, shaken. I drive us around for about an hour before eventually going home to make sure we weren't being followed. As inconclusive as the whole thing was, that was the last time I ever saw Eddie, and I often wonder if this was just a string of coincidences, or if it was more sinister. After all, he didn't even live in Georgia. Why was he at one of my favorite bars alone? The night I happened to go through all his old messages. Had he somehow gotten a hold of my location via Facebook? I made sure all my location services were off when I checked my phone. So to this day, I have no idea how he ended up there, or what his intentions were. But regardless, Eddie, let's not meet again.
So this all happened throughout my high school experience. I'm currently a junior at my school, and this all started the second semester of my freshman year. The first incidents were close to the end of the freshman year. There were a few my sophomore year, and there's only been one so far my junior year, and it's all completely true. I tried looking for the police records that go with it, but I couldn't find anything because of how long it was. The guy in question, I'll call him Alex, is Asian with really short hair and something like 5'4". He's in the same grade as my oldest sister. He's also an avid user of cigarettes, alcohol, and the likes. He even bragged to me that he got his license taken away because he went 60 miles an hour above the speed limit on a highway. A damn highway with the limit of 65 miles per hour. That meant he went at 125. So basically, an ill-behaved boy was chasing a really good girl. I'll give you the entire story now, and I hope it makes everyone who reads this a little more careful when making new friends. The second semester of my freshman year, I took an art class in hopes to get an elective credit. I was sitting with some friends talking about the projects we were making, and Alex walks through. I'd never noticed him in class before, which was really strange. I should also put this on a timeline for you, to make this a little easier to follow. It was close to prom season, so early March, and luckily close to the end of the year. He started talking about whatever, and we really hit it off. After a week, I started seeing him popping up around me, in the hallways, outside my classes, and he'd talk to me during passing time. I didn't think much of it, being the stupid, naive child I was. I should also mention that he rode my bus in the afternoon. Alex and I would sit by each other on the bus and talk, which just encouraged further interaction with him. One day, my older sister, who is 2 grades above me, didn't have theater practice after school, so she took the bus home. and when she got on, she saw me next to Alex. Her face had turned white, and she sat down near the front of the bus. I thought it was really strange, so I planned on asking her about it when I got off the bus, but I forgot to. As prom got even closer, Alex kept talking about it with me. My friends and I all assumed he was going to ask me, because not only did he follow me around, but he wouldn't shut up about it, and he was clearly showing signs of interest in me. Unfortunately for him, however, I was in a relationship with someone at the time, and it was a girl. I had absolutely no interest in dating him. If he did ask me, though, I would need to say we'd need to go as friends. Thankfully, Alex told me instead that he'd like me to tell Tanya that if she didn't have a date, that he'd love to bring her. Almost immediately remembering the incident on the bus, I just said, "She's got a date already, but thanks," wanting to protect her. Over the next few days, Alex actually started talking about sexual statics. Things like average length of someone's manhood, or the average age someone loses their virginity. I got super uncomfortable about this, and told some of the boys in my class that if it got brought up again, I'd go sit with them, and they gladly offered to protect me. This was my first set of red flags. Another instance that set off red flags about Alex was when I got home, and the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw Alex there. This wasn't the strangest part, because I got off the bus before Alex did, so he saw where I had lived. I yelled to my mom that someone was here to see me, and I went out on the front porch to go talk to him. He was with his friends, and yelled to them that he was going to catch up with them later, and he wanted to talk to me first. He told me about some mundane stuff, and I was getting bored. So bored, in fact, that I just bluntly decided to ask him if he liked me. I was tired of him always beating around the bush, and I just wanted a stupid answer. Alex kind of froze and danced around the subject, confirming my suspicions. The way he avoided telling me that he liked me was really strange, bragging to me about his drugs and illegal escapades. My dad was also just coming home from work at the time, too, so I had an excuse to leave the really uncomfortable situation. When my dad came in the house, he told me about how nice Alex seemed, and I looked over to Tanya, and she looked upset about it, but neither of us said anything. Later on, not on the same day though, I posted a picture on my Instagram, and he commented on it. I still don't know how he got my Instagram to this day. He commented his phone number, telling me to text him, and that my dad was really chill. Along with the demand for me to text him, he continued to almost harass me on the direction of messaging on Instagram, asking to hang out. This was another red flag that set things off for me, making me weary of him, and I decided that I needed to be very careful with him from now on. In early May, he continued to follow me from class to class, but from a further distance. This was absolutely mortifying, but my girlfriend at the time thought it was hilarious. She said that it was funny seeing a strange boy chase a gay that had no chance with him. I laughed with her on the outside, but internally, I was really scared. It was at this time frame that he actually showed up in my window. I should mention that my parents weren't home at this time either. They were out grocery shopping while all my sisters were home alone with me. I was done with all my homework, and I was practicing my makeup skills so I can do the makeup of a few girls that were going to prom. I had my earbuds in and I was listening to my music when I heard some sort of tapping noise. I took them out, listened intently for a moment, then popped them back in. I heard the tapping noise once again and took my earbuds out again, once again listening. This happened a few times until I just kept my earbuds out permanently. I finally heard it again and found it coming from my window. I quickly wiped off my makeup and grabbed a pocket knife that I kept under my pillow. I opened my curtains and saw Alex just standing there. He was strangely dressed in a three-piece tuxedo with a single white rose. He said something and I couldn't hear him through the glass. I yelled through the glass I was going to come outside and talk to him. As I walked up the stairs to go outside, Tanya came up to me, terrified. She told me not to go outside, and I asked why. She told me that Alex was outside, and that he was dangerous. She revealed to me that he stalked her freshman year, and followed her around the way he did me. We both panicked together, and I heard the garage door open, signaling that our parents were home.
We ran to the foyer, telling our dad that Alex was outside and that he needed to do something about it. He walked over to the side of the house where my window was and talked to him. I never knew what he said, but it kept Alex away for a while, which was really nice. But things suddenly got a lot worse from there. Alex started talking to me again, but this time it was about sex and drugs, even worse than before, telling me about all the drugs he had with him and about all the girls he screwed, going into extreme detail. I went to go sit with the other boys in the art class, but it did nothing. He still talked about it, even making one of the hockey players uncomfortable. They did their best to shield me, but it only went so far. This was my final red flag. Before I deleted his number and blocked him on Instagram, I was too uncomfortable to put myself through any more social interactions with him. The worst it had gotten, though, was 2 days before the last day of school. I was getting ready for bed, around 10 p.m. when I heard a knock at my window. I once again grabbed my knife and looked out my window, assuming the worst, but praying for it to be just the bushes outside my window. I saw the very dark outline of a figure, and my heart had dropped. I knew it was Alex, so I closed my curtains and ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom, almost in tears about Alex being at my window. My dad and I both went back down to my window, and no one was there. My dad thought Alex could still be there, just hiding in the bushes outside my window. My dad decided to try to scare him off, and went to turn on the back porch lights and call for my dogs. I didn't get any more knocks at my window for maybe 2 minutes. I heard another knock and told my dad. He just marched straight outside at this point and found him sitting by my window with his hood up. I don't know what happened, but the police were called, and they had to escort him back to his house. It was terrifying, but I was pissed at that point. Why wouldn't he just leave me alone? It doesn't stop there, however. The next day during math class, I sat in a spot that faces the window. With my back to the door, halfway through the hour, one girl in the class shouts out my name, telling me to look behind me. I turn around, as does the rest of the class, and there was Alex, standing intently above me, silent. I got up, ready to punch him in the face, but he ran out the door. I just stood in the doorway of the room and broke into tears. 3 other people comforted me, and my girlfriend told the teacher what was going on. The scariest part, however, was that I never told him my schedule. Later that day, my mom, Tanya, and I went to the police at our school. When the officer said we could do a no-contact agreement, we ruled it out because it would take too long to put into place. With only a few days left in school, later when the officer talked to Alex, asking him what he did, he said it was because neither me nor my sister told him no. It was near the end of the year, and nothing happened with him over the summer. My sophomore year, though, I had another class with him. I immediately told the teacher about everything so that she knew, and everyone in class protected me from him. I had no further incidents from him. The teacher actually cared about me, and is now one of my close friends. My sophomore year was clear of any incidences, and I had pretty much forgotten the existence until recently. I woke up and checked my phone after turning off the alarm. I saw that I had gotten a random Facebook message from someone I didn't know. My Facebook is about as private as it gets, so I didn't know that it was possible to receive messages from people that I wasn't friends with on Facebook. My sophomore year, Alex was supposed to graduate, but he didn't. His name wasn't even said at the ceremony, and wasn't even listed in the program. Tanya and I both laughed about it, but we knew that it meant that he was going to be in our city longer. I looked at it anyways, and it was very sexual messages. It read, "I need to cream you and stretch it out real good, make you squirt and cream all over it." It was annoying, and I get messages like that all the time from bots on Instagram, so I would have ignored it, but because it was on Facebook Messenger, it was really strange. I clicked on the person's name, and their profile came up. I scrolled through their pictures, and I saw a picture that made my heart sink. A picture of Alex. It was Alex's profile, and he had messaged me, and changed the profile's name and location. I only showed it to a few people, but not to my parents yet. I showed it to my current boyfriend, who showed it to his mom, and she told me to tell my parents. The reason we showed it to a teacher was because he'd been around the school grounds within the last few weeks, and she may be able to do something about it. Nothing has happened with Alex since, but if something else happens, there is a chance he won't make it out of the situation alive. Because I'm fed up with him, and he's caused me and my family enough grief. Please be careful who you choose to make friends with, and what sort of information you give out. Don't put yourself through what I've been through. Let's not meet again, you creepy fucker. So when I was a senior in high school, I was out of the blue contacted one day by this random guy on MySpace. I vaguely recognized him, but didn't really know him. He told me that they knew me from school, and I had tortured him in math a couple of times. This should have been my first red flag that something was off. I hate math, and I've never tutored anyone in it. I told him he was mistaken, but I tried to be nice to him, and we struck up a friendly conversation. Soon the guy, Brian, started talking to me at school. It started off pretty innocently. He was giving me more attention than I wanted from him, but I was flattered and didn't think anything of it at the time. He was a couple of years younger than me, and I figured he had developed a crush on me primarily because we were both kind of odd compared to the other kids in our high school. It was a very small school, and he and I were two of the very small number of alternative kids there. He was pretty emo, while I tended to be a bit more towards punk. Both of us loved My Chemical Romance. I figured he was just into me because there weren't many other girls with similar interests. Before long, he started waiting for me at my locker, every day, between every class. He started following me around before school and during lunch. He started coming to my performances. I tried to be polite, but started to avoid him. I would go to the local grocery store to eat lunch, even though it was more expensive, because underclassmen weren't allowed to leave campus. The situation continued to escalate to the point where he was sexually harassing me every chance I failed to avoid him. If he was waiting for me at my locker, he would say explicit things to me, tell me what he wanted to do to me, and tell me that he was having sex with his girlfriend. He wished that it was me, though. At homecoming, he left his girlfriend waiting awkwardly while he came to tell me that he really wanted to have all of us to have a threesome. Luckily, my girlfriends were there with me and came over as soon as they noticed him talking to me, which made him scurry away from us. As quickly as it started, it was over. One day he stopped showing up at school. I was relieved, but curious. After about a month of him being gone, my friend mentioned him in front of my dad. My dad questioned me about what happened, and I ended up telling him the whole story. He seemed really troubled. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me why Brian had been absent from school recently. Apparently, not long after homecoming, Brian had strapped some fireworks to a cat and set them off. The cat exploded, and Brian had laughed. He got caught and sent to kiddie jail and was committed to a psychiatric facility by his parents after he was released. I don't know what happened to him after that. I'm thinking I dodged the bullet, though, because he turned out to be even crazier than I thought he was.
Back in 2013, I was living with my ex at the time, who lived near a nice country village, and as I was in between jobs at the time, I picked up a job at a local garden center. It was casual retail work, fairly decent pay, and easy-going enough that I could take a coffee break frequently and wear basically whatever I liked as long as I wore my work polo shirt. It was walking distance from my ex's house, and full of people of all ages who were the most lovely people I had ever met. Most of the regular customers who came to the garden center were usually sweet old people who could visit the cafe because we had free teas and discounted lunches for OAPs if they had a store card. So you often got to know all of them, and some of them we gave nicknames. Most of them sweet, like Pink Hair Lady, a badass 80-year-old grandma who wore a tasseled leather jacket and bright pink hair. Then there was Camper Van Couple, who used to drive a really cool camper van with bright orange flowers painted on it. You get the idea. With creepy artist man, he gave most of the young girls weird vibes. He wore a straw hat, was in his late 40s, had round gold-rimmed glasses, and would wear strange graphic shirts with lewd images and slogans on the back. He always wore ripped jeans where his knees were always hanging out of them, which were always dirty with paint or mud or something else. He had this weird half-smile that would never leave his face, and a kind of leer that made people feel uncomfortable. He would take off his glasses and clean them constantly, which kind of made you feel like he was trying to get a better look at the girls who worked there, especially the younger ones. Anyways, it was a roasting hot summer's day, and I gratefully accepted the job of watering the hanging baskets outside, where I could avoid the humid, sweaty heat of the greenhouses. I was wearing black shorts and a red polo, and my tool belt to prune, and deadhead plants as I went. With the hose in my hand and sunnies on my face, I was busy, but enjoying the solitary job at the quietest part of the garden center. Well, hello there. Out of particularly nowhere, he slipped out behind some wooden trellises and looked me up and down, smiling with his weird, too small teeth. His eyes lingered on me for what felt like an uncomfortable few seconds, and I turned off my hose and asked him if he needed anything. He shook his head and kind of shrugged, still smirking at my legs. Okay, sir. Have a nice day. Let me know if you need anything. I turned to continue. Cag, as I called him, said, I've never seen you here before. You're a new one. Huh? Well, I've been here for 8 months now. I must have missed the memo that a beauty like you started. You have a nice tan. You look young, Cag said. Thanks. I'm 23. Anyways, I have to get back to work. Then Cag said, Nice to meet you, Casey. I suddenly remembered my name badge, and slightly irritated that he now knew my full name. I make a beeline for the smoking area, where the tool shed was, with an excuse to grab some smaller gardening gloves, and by the time I returned to the floor, he had left. As the weeks went by, he would come in the store regularly, usually mid-afternoon, coincidentally, around the time I started my shift. Most of the time I was the only cashier, so I would have to serve him. He would buy the most smallest, pointless things, like floristry wire or a tiny bag of birdseed. It seems like he would purposely make a purchase with the intentions of interacting with me. He would make comments about my appearance, statements mostly like, You have your hair different today. Yesterday you had it down. You now have new glasses. Or that's a different lip color to yesterday's. He would always announce my name loudly and deliberately during every interaction. It felt uncomfortable, but I was 23 and just politely shrugging it off. Around Christmas time, I was decorating the artificial trees, and he cornered me in the forest of them at the back of the store. I kind of stood there and said thank you, but I couldn't keep it as a thought. It was inappropriate to take gifts from customers. He jumped out from behind one and made me jump, to which I was kind of pissed about him doing because I dropped a glass of ornament, and it had smashed all over the floor. He bent down also to try to help, grabbing my wrist and telling me not to touch the glass. His grip was scarily tight and forceful, and his hands were clammy and gross. I slipped my hand out of his grip and asked if I could help him with anything. That's when it got weird. He pulled out a leaflet, and his back pocket told me that he was an artist and had a Christmas art showing happening in the local church hall, and he wanted me to go with him. He told me that he was a painter, and he thought I would like his work. I asked him if he wanted me to pin the leaflet to the local event board, and he reached out and touched my arm and said, No, the invitation is specifically for you. He pointed his finger and jabbed it into my breast and said, You. So I'm standing there in a dark corner, obscured from view by artificial Christmas trees, just kind of cornered by this guy who was touching me. I cringed away and said I was busy with my boyfriend that day. Sorry, and kind of scampered off. I remember feeling really strange after that. The fact he grabbed my wrist and jabbed his finger into my chest that way. I told a few of my colleagues about it, and they all told me they would warn me next time he was in the store so I could maybe hang out of the storeroom until he was gone. Well, that memo just missed a few of the temp Christmas staff because one day I got told by one Your friend is asking for you at the tills. It wasn't unusual for my friends to stop by as it was fairly popular for gifts, etc. So I think it was maybe my ex's mom or something. I head to the till, and there he is. He's holding a piece of paper. I cringe, but he had seen me now, so I walk over and asked what he needed from me. He passed the paper over and asked me to open it. Folded up was a drawing of me, with exaggerated breasts and cartoon-like eyes watering the hanging baskets in a suggestive kind of position. I kind of stood there and said thank you, but I couldn't keep it, as I thought it was inappropriate to take gifts from customers. I handed it back to him, and he kind of looked at me with this angry stare. He turned around and walked out without another word. By this point, I had had enough. I knocked on my manager's door and told him about the whole scenario that had just happened and all the previous interactions I had had with him over the past year. He watched the CCTV and agreed that it was so strange that he gave me this gross picture and told me he would talk to him if he came back. He praised me for my reaction to his advances and said I was doing the right thing and he could try and see him off next time. The next day was a Sunday and I was not due into work. My boss calls me and tells me he just received a call from HQ stating that an anonymous caller had called in to report a staff member inappropriately coming on to the customer. The staff member they had described and named was me. The caller had said that I had been inappropriate towards him at work, offered to do it with him, had led him on and obviously promiscuous, and that I had been pursuing him for over a year. The jerk even described a fictitious relationship we had had, and ranted loudly about how I had cheated on my boyfriend before hanging up. HQ quickly didn't believe a word as my manager had already mentioned the guy to one of the higher-ups, but they thought it was wise to let me know about this crazy guy and suggested I report it to the police. The next day, I did just that. The officer I spoke with said that he matched the description of a man who was a local pest, somebody who often harassed young girls in the local area. He was also known to stalk girls in his car and attempted to abduct a young girl 4 years ago. The police officers assured me that he would file a report and talk to him officially, and that he was not allowed in the garden center or anywhere near me ever again, and if he did, and I was to call the police, and he would be arrested. Unfortunately, though, it never happened. It never stopped him sending a ranting letter to my workplace addressed to me saying he would kill himself if I didn't take him back and receive his gifts of what he drew of me. Fortunately, the police saw this as unsolicited contact, and he was thankfully arrested. So creepy artist guy, let's not meet, ever again.
When I was around 14, there was this guy that seemed to be around my age that used to be in my neighborhood. He didn't stay out there, but he had family that did. He was baby-faced, light eyes, kind of quiet, but he would talk to me. He didn't really play with us. He was the kind of just stood there watching us as we played, like maybe a family member told him to keep an eye on his younger cousins kind of person. He would flirt with me from time to time, but I did not think that much of it. I think he had a crush on me. I remember one particular time, he kissed me, and one of the neighborhood teenagers had said something to him along the lines of, "What did I tell you about messing with these younger girls?" I just assumed he must have been around 16 and didn't think much of it. He would take walks around the block and talk. We would hang out every once in a while. Sometimes he would knock on my door or ring the doorbell for me to come outside. I think I might have even rode with him once to 7-Eleven a couple of times. And then I guess either he stopped coming around or I just became too old to play outside. Years passed by, and I did not run into him, or if I did, it was not often. This year I was coming home and he saw me park my car. He was driving down the street. He stopped his car and got out. He kind of cornered me between my car door and my car, saying stuff like, "Hey, it has been a while," and we would catch up. Nothing really seemed out of the ordinary, but his eyes just seemed crazy. It was like he was looking right through me. He didn't really have an expression on his face. Something just seemed off. I got this weird vibe from him. I remember asking him what his Instagram was. He said he wasn't on Instagram because of his job. I also know that I am a friend with his younger cousin on Instagram, so I just figured I would look at her page and see if she had any pictures of him. So I just went along with what he said as I slowly tried to move to close my door. I went into the house and tried to shake this vibe that I felt from him. That night he called me and asked me if I wanted to go to the beach and walk around and catch up. Before I could even give a response, he asked, "Do you trust me?" Now, even if I trusted him before, he asked, I damn sure don't trust him now. Who just asked that out of the blue anyways? I said, well, that's a weird question to ask. I have to call you back. He immediately got mad at me for saying I wanted to get off the phone. It was kind of like a switch went off. I assured him that I was going to call him back, and he finally calmed down and got off the phone. He started texting me things like, what do you like about me? I think I responded something like, I haven't seen you in over 14 years. You might not even be the same person. He proceeded to tell me what he liked about me. I do not even know what made me ask him, but I asked him how old he was. My stomach felt like I was on a roller coaster when I read his response. He said he was 37. Now I'm 29, which means he might be 8 years older than me. That means when I was 14, he was 22. This whole time I thought he was only a few years older than me, and he was 8 years older than me? That's when I started to realize that his infatuation with me was not as innocent as I thought it was. Now throughout the years, I had a problem with someone being outside my window. One particular night, my boyfriend was drunk and mad that I would not come outside to talk to him. He was outside my window, trying to get me to come outside. Then all of a sudden, I heard two voices outside. Shortly after that, I heard my then boyfriend say, tell me to come outside, but it sounded like he sobered up in an instant. I told him no. He told me it was serious. When I finally went outside, he told me that a guy was cutting through the neighbor's yard to hop my fence into my yard, but because it was dark, he didn't see my then boyfriend until he was close to him. Then my boyfriend said something along the lines of, hey, what are you doing? And the guy started to stumble over his words, saying he was just cutting through to go to the other side of the block. But then he turned around and went back into the direction he came from. I just explained all of that because I do not even know what connected the two incidences in my mind, but I went to his cousin's Instagram page and found a picture of him. I texted it to my ex, and before I could even explain why I was sending him the picture, he said, that's the guy that tried to get in your yard. My stomach sunk so far into my ass I thought I'd never eat again. Then he said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I remember his eyes. I never saw him again after this. Whole do you trust me thing. But I shudder to think that even though we were not in contact all these years, that he might have been outside my window on different occasions. So creepy guy that I thought was my friend that ended up being a lot older than I thought he was, let's not meet again. Many years ago, my sister had a stalker. First class. He claimed he was talking directly with God and angels, and they told him he was destined to be with her, and he would stop at nothing to obey what he was commanded to do. He occasionally violated a restraining order by coming over to try to talk to her, and so on. And on one occasion, he was seen wandering around the front yard, then just seemed to vanish. I went out with two friends and scoured the neighborhood, but couldn't find him, so we ended up assuming he was parked around the block and drove off. On one occasion, however, he was more bold for some reason, parking on the street directly in front of the house and walking up the sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon. My sister wasn't home and wasn't expected back for hours, but my parents were, and he knocked on the door saying that he knew she wasn't home, but he just wanted to talk. Since she wasn't around and we really wanted the police to nab this guy, we allowed him to come in while my mom slipped into the kitchen and called the police. They promised they'd be there soon. For the next 30 to 40 minutes, he rambled nonstop about angels, about how God had chosen him to be a prophet and he was going to usher in the end of the world and bring about a new era of peace, and how he knew my sister was supposed to help him accomplish great and glorious things. We just sat there quietly, nodding politely, wondering what was taking the police so long. This guy had never actually been violent, so we weren't really afraid for our safety. And it was three of us, just one of him. And since we were expecting the cops to show up any moment to give him some new jewelry, This was a calculated gamble. Suddenly, he stopped mid-sentence and stood up. He said simply, "I have to go now," walked out the door, and got into his car and drove away. Not even a minute later, a police car pulled up and parked in the exact parking spot that this car had just vacated. 2 officers got out, and after asking questions for several minutes, thanked us for the report, said they'd keep an eye out for him, and drove away. He never came back to our house. About a year or so later, I was told that he had been committed to a long-term psychiatric facility somewhere, but haven't heard anything about him for over a decade at this point. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a Stalker of the Night. And I'll see you next time.